It's too bad she won't live. But then again, who does? So I've just gotten back from seeing Blade Runner 2049, and this could end up being a really confused review because I'll probably get into spoilers later and I'll give a heads up before I get into that. But this movie is good. It is very good. But I'm not sure if I actually like it. I'm still trying to figure that out, and maybe it would be better if I had just slept on it rather than making a review video right away, but this is what I'm doing, so here we go anyway. So, the movie, as I said, it is good. Denis Villeneuve, this is only the second film of his that I've seen, but he's absolutely a solid director, knows what he's doing. They've got Roger Deakins as the cinematographer, so it looks gorgeous. All the performances are very good. The progression of the story is good, despite being almost 3 hours. There are moments that feel a little dragged out, but no individual scene is superfluous. There aren't any, plot threads that are filler and dragging it down, so it doesn't feel weighed down in that sense. And it is a pretty admirable and I think well thought out continuation and progression of the world of Blade Runner. All that having been said, I'm still not entirely sure I like it, and it's because of reasons that I'm gonna have to get into spoilers for. So I'll just say it's a good movie. It deserves to be seen, but I have weird things I'm still trying to sort out about it. So I'm gonna start getting into spoilers with this. I'm not gonna detail the plot, so if you're here for a synopsis of that, I'm not going to give it to you. So part of why I'm not entirely sure where I land with this film is that my love of the original, and I do love the original, it's one of my favorite films, but that love is very specific because that film does something that I love, but so few stories, especially in the medium of film, ever do this. And that is a huge world, but a small story. Because generally when you have a world as big and as designed and as expansive and as intricate as the world of Blade Runner, as a general rule, filmmakers also scale up the story so that the story feels like it is big enough to justify the world you've created for it. The original Blade Runner doesn't really do that. The original Blade Runner is a small story about characters who, within the confines of that story, don't really matter. I mean, in some cases what they are matters and like what they represent matters, but like as individuals, in the big scheme of things, these people don't really matter. Our lead character especially. And there's something I like about that, just as a field, that it's not quite like the average Joe view, but it's like it's the story of someone who's not a mover and shaker in this world. The story of someone who's not reshaping the destiny of the environment in which they live. I mean, it's part of why my favorite film in the Alien franchise is the first one. Huge world, massive implications, small story. It's part of my love of the first two Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy books, and it's a vibe that is very difficult to find, and this movie doesn't quite have it. The story in this one is bigger. The implications are bigger. The direct hand that the characters we're following have in events is bigger. Not so big that it's like totally lost the thread, but definitely bigger than before. This story matters to this world much more so than the original. And there's nothing inherently wrong with that. And I think in many ways it was probably the smarter way to go. I mean, what's the alternative? If you did a story scaled the same way that the original film was, then it's really hard to not just have it feel like a retread. So I don't think this was the incorrect decision for the movie to make. It's just that because that key part of my personal love of that original movie is something that kind of had to go in order to do this story, yeah, it means it's a bit harder for me to connect with. This story also has more or less flat out villains. I mean, we don't know entirely what their deal is, but the way Jared Leto and the character of Love are introduced, they are very much the villains of this story, much more so than anybody in the original Blade Runner was. And there's something about Jared Leto's character specifically. It sounds bad. I don't think it's the performance. I think it's the way the character is written. And there's just something about him coming out and spouting this pseudo-religious, I am a god kind of thing that isn't quite working for me. Because he's sort of our substitute Terrell. Different character very much in terms of his approach. But to make the comparison anyway, because it's valid, Tyrell in the first movie, he seemed to understand his own boundaries, and he seemed human. He didn't seem like a megalomaniac, which is how Jared Leto comes across. And the character of Love, I kind of went back and forth on. Initially, I liked her, and the actress plays her very well, but she got pushed further and further into outright villainy by the end. And yet, then again, at the very end, there's some moments that kind of bring her back. And that's another thing. This movie actually lost me through most of the second act and then got me back in the third act. The reason it lost me in the second act is, well, first of all, there's the whole thing with a child having been born from a replicant mother. And I get that that's a big deal, and I'm okay with that. I'm less okay with that replicant being Rachel, and I think I'm kind of not okay with the father being Deckard. Because again, it retroactively makes them important in this world, and that feels, I don't know, it feels masturbatory. It feels like, oh, remember those characters from the first movie? Look at how important they are. It's like, but they weren't that important in the first movie. Anyway, I've talked about that already. But the inherent idea that a replicant has had a child and the implications of that being massive, I'm actually totally okay with, because the original sort of skirted on the very fringe of some big ideas as well. This one's a little bit more front and center, but it's got that whole second act where it is really heavy-handedly implied that it is Jared Leto. And actually, I'll pause right there. I really like that they established in scene 1 that he is a replicant and he knows he is. That was just a really good way to deal with that right off the bat with his character. And tangent to the tangent, I love that they managed to include Deckard and not definitively answer the ambiguity of whether or not Deckard is a replicant. I knew that Denis Villeneuve was attempting to do that. I had no idea how he could include Deckard and pull that off. He did, somehow. Props to that. So there's that whole segment where Jared Leto's character believes that he is the child. That everyone's after and everyone wants to figure out what happened to. And I didn't like that entire segment. I kind of want to watch the movie again to see, now that I know that is in fact not the case, whether that'll play better for me. And I feel like I should have guessed that earlier on because it did seem so heavy-handed with it. But that whole segment, I was like, are we really doing Son of Deckard? And it still could have blown it even when it revealed that was not the case, because it could have, if it had been like trying to be too clever about it could have come across as, we fooled you. It's like, well, no, you were doing something stupid and you stopped doing that stupid thing. I appreciate that, but I'm not going to give you points for it. But it really did pull it off just well enough, basically by focusing on the gut punch of that to the character of Kay, Ryan Gosling's character himself. And that was a really good way to hinge that, so that rather than feeling like a twist on the audience, it was just a gut punch for that character. And that was a good way. So the movie lost me pretty much through most of that second act and got me back at that point. And then pretty much had me through the remainder of it. I need to see this thing at least one more time to really firm up my opinion of it, because now that I have a better sense of, sort of the lull period, and I know it's not doing the thing that I was afraid it was doing when I was actually watching it, that maybe that whole segment will play better for me. I don't know now, but yeah, this is a really well-made movie, and I wish it was doing better at the box office. I really do. And I am glad that I saw it, even though I'm still not entirely sure I know I like the original better, but honestly, that was never a question in my mind. There was never a possibility I was gonna like this better. Having talked it out, I'm leaning more towards liking it than I had been, but there are some reservations. It's basically a case of this movie either just barely hits the, yeah, I like it thing, or it just barely missed it. And I'm not entirely sure which, and it's going to be a really close call. But I still, if you're still watching, if you stuck through the spoilers and haven't watched yet, that's a shame, because I would really encourage anyone to go and watch this, even if you haven't seen the original, because honestly, you don't need to have had seen the original in order to have this make sense and have it work. So it's a piece of smart, high concept, big budget sci-fi. It deserves to be seen. I would like to see it do well so that we can get more movies like this, not in terms of reviving old franchises, we're getting too much of that, but just in terms of allowing this big a scale and this big a canvas for ideas like this. What are your thoughts about Blade Runner 2049, whatever they are? Drop something down in the comments. Let's talk about it. Don't forget to like, subscribe. Check me out on Twitter at Council of Geeks. Give a listen to the Council of Geeks podcast, available on iTunes and Stitcher. I am also one half of the Punch Like a Girl podcast, now available on the Fire and Water Podcast Network, fireandwaterpodcast.com. And until next time, this council is adjourned.